But it also factors in intelligence. And so it's not just interacting with the social media platform, but it's also living with the social media platform. It becomes part of your everyday life. And so this is one of the ways that social networks has changed everything in terms of how we think about our own privacy and what it means to be public and what it means to be private and what data is known to be information that is private, et cetera, et cetera. So, and not to mention, social networks are low cost, usually free, but at the expense of your giving your data, which doesn't really make it free at all. And they're easy to access through mobile applications. And more importantly, consumers of information also become producers, which has led to a variety of different problems, but also opportunities for individuals that live in different villages to present the news that they go through as verifiable information, but it also has led to issues such as fake news, which I'm sure many other presenters will talk about during this conference. Finally, the private sector, so global information markets, metadata. As I mentioned earlier, data is what you use to pay for these services. And your data becomes then a commodity of trade. So all of these, next slide please. So all of these ICT technological developments work together to change the way we apply human rights. And I'm going to go through that as well. So out of all of four of those things, obviously the internet is the most important technological development because it is what brings all the other three factors together. The internet has allowed people to access data, content, goods, services that are not typically available in national jurisdictions. It bypasses laws and national laws and restrictions. An example is you can find the PDF of your favorite book through the internet and print it out, and then you have your book. Whereas before you wouldn't have been able to access it. You have access to different kinds of music. There's Amazon, there's different e-commerce websites, etc. Even though a lot of global south countries have kind of been left behind in terms of e-commerce, one of them being Tunis. We cannot use our credit cards to pay for anything online, because our credit cards are only valid in the country of Tunis. So, but the next slide. And so also through the internet, people can do things online as well as offline. And so bringing it full circle back to human rights, the UN Human Rights Council agreed that online behavior should be protected as if it's offline. And so this was in 2012. And it's revolutionized the way that, human rights advocates such as myself have been saying this for years and years, but this is finally something, it's a real recognition that the rights that you have offline are also available to you online for you to exercise as a human being, because remember, they're universal, inalienable, and indivisible. And so this was a big thing for a lot of people and for a lot of countries. It's difficult to enforce by national jurisdictions, especially when national jurisdictions tend to treat the virtual life as a separate life, as if it's not part of everyday life. It's not part of your offline life. It's this virtual sphere that human rights law cannot reach, when in reality it should be able to now. But it's still something that nation states are struggling to enforce. Next slide. And I'll try to go quicker because I know that I have technically 5 minutes for my presentation, but this is kind of longer. So finally, and my last 2 points about the internet and why it's the most important change is the creation of information intermediaries that provide users with content, such as ISPs, internet service providers, and OSPs, which are online service providers, such as Google, Facebook. These are service providers that provide you with services when you're already online. So the ISP provides you with the connection, the OSP provides you with the services you use when you're already connected. These intermediaries have started to become very powerful because they have your data, because they have your information about your credit cards, about your name, your gender, all sorts of personally identifying information. They have become extremely powerful. And so they also sometimes are led to have potential responsibilities in international regimes. And I don't know if anybody's talking about the right to be forgotten during the conference, but that's one way where Google would have the responsibility to not present certain results about a certain person if they make it known that they don't want these links to be shared. Finally, next slide. The enforcement of human rights online and offline have been executed through different means. So, for example, the protection of rights has been executed through international treaties that are, like I said earlier, reflected in national legislation that follow the principles that have been espoused in such treaties. But it's also through internet governance, which is largely outside of UN agreements and international tools. This is a different kind of process where several stakeholders come together from business, government, private sector, NGOs, and the technical community get together to discuss the issues that face internet users all around the world. So there are many ways, many different avenues to enforce these human rights on the internet. And every country is kind of struggling to enforce them in their own way or not. So next slide, we'll go to the internet and specific rights. And I'm actually going to, I'm going to kind of skip through A and B. So rights enhanced by ICTs and rights threatened by ICTs, just in the interest of time. But they're there anyway, so the presentation is available for the whole audience in case they're interested in following. So the internet and specific rights. So freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of assembly and association, privacy, the right to life, liberty and security of person, and authorial rights, many other things, many other rights are all represented by usage of the internet. They are, so, and actually I'll just go through the next two slides. If you go to the next slide and then the slide after, so if you look at rights enhanced by ICTs or by technological development, you can see freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of assembly, association, and I'll give you some solid examples of that. So now anybody can express him or herself through the internet and through social media, and just it's as easy as clicking. You know, you can express your opinions about whether it's a political issue or a religious issue. You're able to do it in an easier fashion. Freedom of information as well, as I discussed earlier, you're able to access information in an easier way. And then finally, freedom of assembly and association. You can join groups on Facebook, you can join different wikis, you can be a part of an online community, and that your right to assemble and your right to associate with certain ideas and groups is enhanced by these developments. Some rights that are threatened by ICT, if you go to the next two slides, are the right to privacy and also the right to free expression, because whereas it's a right that's enhanced by ICTs, since it's easier for an individual to express themselves on the internet, it's also an opportunity for a government to censor the individual or to remove their posts or to imprison them or to arrest them or detain them for something that they said. And so some of the research that I've actually done before shows that in some Arab countries, so I studied Tunis, Saudi, Urdun, and Egypt. And I've shown that there are many cases of individuals that have been arrested for simply stating their opinions online. And so that makes it a right that is actually threatened by the internet and by the ability to be able to express yourself so easily, because it's so easy to track, and governments are so keen, sometimes certain governments are very keen on criminalizing certain speech. So it is a right that is threatened by the internet. And then the right to privacy. Obviously, when you submit your personal data to an ISP or an OSP or a private company that barters with your data, there's something to be said about your right to a livelihood that is unencumbered by unreasonable intrusions into your privacy. So next slide, please. And this is the last bullet point. I wanted to go through some of the origins of these rights. So if you look at freedom of expression, it's mainly derived from, at least insofar as international human rights law goes, it is derived from Article 19 of the ICCPR, which is the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And as I mentioned earlier, it's enhanced by the internet. through the availability of publishing platforms, blogs, wikis, etc. Expression is more affordable. You have a greater audience. People listen to you more, or they don't listen to you. It depends on how you express yourself and what you're saying. And you can also express yourself anonymously on the internet, which gives your person more safety to protect what you're saying, to protect your message, and also to protect the dignity and safety of your person. It's also broadened the scope and reach of expression. As I mentioned, you could have a very wide audience, whereas before you can't. It's hard to get 600, 700 people together in a room to listen to you speak, whereas now you just post a status on Facebook and 700 people like it and read it, and it's much different. Freedom of information, next slide, also derived from Article 19. It is enhanced by the internet because you have an endless, vast breadth of information, and it ranges from entertainment to health, to education, etc. I don't have to go through this. And also facilitates transparency with a government that is willing to be transparent and to not be corrupt, but it facilitates transparency and citizen participation in the democratic process. We try to do that in Tunis through different open gov initiatives that have somewhat succeeded to varying extents, and in some cases did not succeed at all. Freedom of association, next slide. It's derived from Article 21 and 22 of the ICCPR, also enhanced by the internet. The right to privacy is Article 17. The right to privacy, and this is the next slide, is actually threatened by the internet in many ways. Surveillance, we all know about that. And some people could say, well, you can encrypt and you could try to be anonymous, and that way you will not give up much of your data. But at the moment, at least, encryption is not as user-friendly as it should be. And the protection of data, or la fuite en français, in French, la fuite, it's like the leak of your personal data sometimes is not within your control. So you have to be very vigilant on erasing your browser history, your cookies, using tracker blockers that block cookies from block cookies from tracking your personal information and what sites you visit, what links you click, etc. So you have to be a lot more proactive as an internet user to protect your privacy, and that's not always hard. It's not always easy, for the alpha user to do. So many organizations have developed countless resources to make it easier for people, but still it remains a challenge for users to protect themselves and their data on the internet. We can skip authorial rights for now, but it is there. So if you all are interested, and there are, next slide as well, other threats, there's cyber stalking, crime, security, and at the moment there's obviously like a very big concern with terrorism and national security, but unfortunately that's very often used as an excuse to crack down on rights. And it's nation states are not typically protecting their countries in a very wise way. And there's this false dynamic there's this false dichotomy that says that in order to be safe, you have to give up some of your privacy. We should not be okay with that. No matter what country you're in, you should not give up part of your privacy. There should be ways for a government to keep its citizens secure without knowing every piece of data about every single citizen. And so that's what I'm trying to do in Tunis and in the rest of the Arab world as well. Finally, and the last slide, just a question that I think the audience should consider. In the future, it might be the case that the internet would be considered a human right, just how we have the human right as access to water or access to education. These are all rights that are protected under various conventions. Do we think that in the future the internet would also be a human right, something that must be guaranteed and provided for by the state? It's something to consider, especially when you keep in mind that the internet has become this cornerstone of realizing and fulfilling other rights. I've already mentioned freedom of expression, association. Without the internet, freedom of expression would be in a different place today. We would not be able to express ourselves the way we do today. There is no consensus on this. Finland is one of the countries that did announced that internet should be a human right. But it's something that is still an ongoing conversation, but there's still plenty to talk about before we talk about whether the internet is a human right. Namely, how do we better protect the existing freedoms that we have from from not only the state but also private actors and intermediaries as well. So I hope this presentation gave you all like a small bird's eye view of the inner mechanics of international human rights law and how it applies to the internet. I know a lot of these things seem very obvious at first, but in my opinion, it's really good to have the breakdown of what exactly changed, so that way a person starts to understand this is the aspect of X technological development that we need to look at with regards to privacy, and this is the aspect that we need to look at with regards to freedom of association. So from an epistemological point of view, it's important to kind of categorize these things and know exactly how the changes have occurred. So I hope this helped, and I hope you all found this interesting. My contact information should be available on the Access Now website. If you all have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. And I wish I was there. And I hope you all have a very good rest of your conference. And take care. ومع السلامة. Bye.